Hey everyone, what is up? What is up? What's happening? How are you guys doing? Tell me in the chat, and please turn on your cameras. Please turn on your cameras because it will feel better to see people than just a screen, right? Before I begin, I see Justin is already here, the speaker, the man for today. You guys are here for a real treat because today are going to dive deeper into the questions you guys have been asking for. You guys learned about DAO, you guys learned about NFT, all of those things you learned about, right? And you guys were also understanding how can you make career into certain things as a designer, as a developer, as a tech person. Today we are going to dive deeper into growth and marketing, right? If you are slightly interested into it, what things you should look at, right? It will give you a lot of great perspective and insights because he's the man who has done things in that thing, right? He's a co-creator of Safary Club. What it is, what has been his journey, you'll hear from himself, right? So with that being said, tell me in the chat how excited are you guys for today's session. Drop boom in the chat if you are really excited and looking forward to this session, right? And thank you for joining in. As I say that you could have been anywhere in the world doing anything on this evening, but you chose to come here and invest time in learning something new. So really appreciate that. Stick till the end. The session is designed in a way that Justin will first teach you and then take questions from you, right? So keep taking your questions. I'll share the link where you can put your questions and Justin will take questions from there, right? With that being said, Justin, over to you. Let me put you, make you co-host and put you on a spotlight. Right. Yeah. Thank you so much, Justin, for doing this. Over to you.
Awesome. Thanks. I'm excited to be here, and I'm going to share my screen real quick. Hopefully this works. Let's see. Second. It's going to have to make me restart my Zoom real quick to share my screen. So I'll be right back. Sorry, technical difficulties.
No worries. So folks, tell me in the chat, what are few things that you are really looking forward to this session? What is one question that you want answer by the end of this session? It's really good way of learning, right? This is one technique that I learned, that before learning, starting any book, starting any course, write down few pointers that you are looking for, right? When you have that lens, right, then you actually find answers at the end of the book or at the end of that thing. So have that approach, it will help. All right, Justin is again here.
I think you have to make me co-host again, and then
yeah. Done.
okay, let's dive in. Yes. So today we're going to talk about Web3 community building, and so we'll talk about community-led growth and why it's the future of growth. We're going to talk about where a lot of Web3 communities went wrong. We're going to talk about what great community building looks like and give you tactics for success for how to build successful communities, whether in Web3 or beyond. So I first wanted to talk a little bit about me. So I'm Justin. I spent the last 5 years doing growth at San Francisco-based tech startups, primarily labor marketplaces. So I've done a lot of different aspects of growth. I first started as a community builder, then I turned into a product manager, then a growth marketer, and then I built out experimentation platforms. And so I started writing about Web3 growth back in January as Jakey on Twitter. So that was sort of a pseudonym that I used to start really exploring what it meant to be in Web3 as a writer, as a content creator. And that sort of launched my career into being a growth leader. And so a little bit about Safary is that when I first dove into Web3, I didn't know anyone. And so I wanted to look for a community for me to be a part of. And there were many great Web3 communities at the time, like Seed Club and Protein and others that were really focused on community builders. But I applied to all those communities and I didn't get into any of them. And so I thought to myself, what do I do now? There are all these great communities, but I can't get into any of them because I don't know anyone in Web3. And so I decided to build my own community. And so this is, I think, a great lesson for all of you out there as well as we get started, is that if there are communities that you want to be a part of, but you aren't able to be in Web3, then you should just create your own community. And there are great things that can come from doing that. So we built Safary in February, and Safary is a community of world-class growth leaders and community builders exploring Web3. Our members hail from Uniswap, OpenSea, Ledger, Unstoppable Domains, CoinMarketCap, Dapper Labs, and 200 other Web3 projects. And our mission is to build the Web3 growth playbook together, collectively with data. And our vision is to make growth collaborative in a way that it never was, never could be in Web2. We believe that Web3 growth is not zero sum. We need to work together and share what works in real time in order to evangelize the Web3 ecosystem. So first, we're going to talk about why community-led growth is the future of growth. So you've seen how Web3 companies are all about communities, but why is that? Yes, people in Web3 love privacy and they love decentralization and they love the vibes that come with community. And yes, crypto is still small enough that we can mostly fit around the campfire together. But I believe that there's a larger trend playing out, which is why community-led growth has taken front and center stage in Web3. And I believe will also take front and center stage soon in Web2 as well. So the big trends, this is the trend that nobody wants to see, but everyone knows to be the case, is that CAC, customer acquisition cost, is rising. And it's doing so for a number of different reasons. But I think that a lot of growth people in particular woke up to this trend. They had sort of seen this trend slowly creeping up year over year in the last few years. But when Netflix reported its Q1 earnings report, so this is last quarter, it seems like that was all any growth leader could talk about, is that last year Netflix spent $500 million in Q1 to acquire 4 million new customers, so $125 CAC. And they forecasted this quarter that they would actually do less than that, so 2.5 million. But they actually only got $500,000 for the same amount of budget that they spent. So they spent 500 million to acquire only 500,000 this quarter. So that's $1,000 CAC, an 8x increase from just last year. And many are calling it the quote unquote canary in the coal mine, aka an early indication of the trend to come. That when large brands like Netflix are spending this much money and getting so few results, that this will have a ripple effect across all businesses in the industry. And as some of us know, rising CAC has been on people's minds for a while, and the reasons for it are the privacy changes from IDFA, GDPR, etc., rising competition. It's easier than ever to start a tech company in 2022, and then also slowing penetration of internet growth are all part of the problem. And so now I'm going to talk a little bit about so how do we combat rising CAC? So in Web2, marketers made the case that they mined all this user data to personalize experiences, and honestly, the experiences did not live up in terms of personalization. And so as reaching customers online becomes increasingly expensive, product differentiation and customer retention have become more important than ever. And it's my opinion that communities can help with both of those things. So for example, communities bring customers closer to the product development process, thus increasing customer ownership and the ability for brands to get it right for them. And then it also creates a very different go-to-market strategy that involves building a brand alongside your customers and transforming them into brand champions, oftentimes before the product even exists. So that's a great example for Safary, is that we started as a community and now we're building a product. And we have more brand loyalty from our potential customers because they've seen our journey along the way. So it's like building out in public, but even more so than what has been done before. And the third reason is that it enables a more personalized connection between the brand and the consumer. So instead of this impersonal mass email outbound that we're used to in Web 2, brands become more human and more trustworthy when they're working directly with their customers, their consumers on a day-to-day basis and interacting with them that way. So another big reason is that people are looking for community now more than ever before. One is, COVID escalated a lot of feelings of loneliness among people across the world, and the Great Resignation, which I don't know if it's just a US-centric thing, but it is driving a real search for purpose of people really questioning, the meaning of their lives in a post-COVID world. And that is also driving a lot of people to look for communities in new ways, both in the digital world and in the IRL, real life world. And the third is that, a lot of the economic injustices by intermediaries that are sort of driving a lot of people towards DAOs are fueling a lot of resentment among people. And so people are wanting to organize on smaller scales to really do something meaningful together. So it's sort of a combination of the current system that we live in, people feeling like that's not working, people looking for smaller groups of people to organize with and join with and find purpose and find community. And on the business side, communities create multipliers. So in terms of acquisition, you get a lot more organic word of mouth to grow your customer base. People join your community, they love your community, they tell people about your community, and it has a different ring to it than just a product experience alone. Retention, people might come for the tool that you're building, but they'll stay for the network. So people inherently want to meet people, and that's why communities are also great. LTV, engaged customers are more likely to be repeat customers than champions when they're in community and engaging with you more often. Moat, there's a famous saying that you can replicate the technology, but you can't replicate the people. Communities are inherently about people, and they're unique because the people that are in them. You could create a totally different Safary, one of you guys, with the exact same playbook that I did, used, but it would be a very different community. Not better or worse, it would just be different because the people are different, and that's what makes communities unique. And then talent. A community member may be your next employee. There's a very, very famous example in Web3 with Axie Infinity. Jiho, who you guys may know as one of the co-founders of Axie Infinity, and he's their head of growth, head of community, most well-known person that works at Axie. He actually started as a community manager. He was never part of the founding team, but he was obsessed with the game early on, became a community manager, and eventually became a co-founder and part of their executive suite. So there's great talent within your community as well from the customer point of view. So let's talk about, now we're going to talk about communities done wrong. And I think that this is a core element that a lot of people got mixed up when they started building Web3 communities is your audience is not your community. And what I mean by that is just because you put a bunch of people who follow your brand into a Discord, that doesn't mean that it's a community. And what we saw in the last 6 to 9 months, especially with Web3 communities, is that, having 10,000, 50,000, 100,000 people in a Discord, a ton of people that you didn't know as a brand and that other people didn't know each other in a Discord, that's not a community. And the way that I think about communities are groups of aligned users, but not all groups of aligned users are communities. So let me break that down. An audience is where one individual member or brand communicates asymmetrically with all the other nodes. And so none of the recipients of those messages are connected. And it's sort of one-to-many makes audience networks powerful for really clear and consistent communication. And so they're a lot easier to control, but they're significantly more fragile. If the creator, for example, is removed, then they collapse. But in the community network, many of the nodes are interconnected. So that's this visualization up here. Is that this many-to-many design is what differentiates a community from an audience. It's much more difficult to build a community at first, but these networks are significantly more resilient. There's no single point of failure. And so some communities will naturally start as audiences, and they evolve by cultivating two concepts, which I think are important for any community builder to think about. Is one, node interconnectivity, aka how connected are the other people in your community, not just to you as a brand, but the other customers, how connected are they to each other? And two is shared utility. So to increase shared utility, owners must increase the benefit each node receives from their participation in the community. So in other words, how connected are people in your community and how much value do they receive from each other, not just you as a brand. Another thing about what I've observed about Web3 communities, particularly when I dove into Web3, is that a lot of the problems actually stem from how you set up.
Can I ask a question?
Sorry, JK, I'll just mute everyone and you can continue. Please unmute yourself and continue.
Sorry. Yeah, we can take questions at the end. So yeah, as I was saying, a lot of problems with communities, I believe, stem from community design. So a lot of communities in the early days, like 6 or 12 months ago, in Web3, were really focused on acquisition. How do we get as many people in our community as possible to show that there's a lot of interest, there's a lot of hype. And so, acquisition was easy, but engagement and retention were difficult. So people built these communities focused on how do we get as many people in them as possible, and less so on how do we make people as engaged and retained as possible. And so when you create these communities that are really meant to drum up hype, you mostly actually get a dead Discord after a few weeks. We saw that, people would say, quote the statistic that you needed at least 50,000 people in your Discord server to sell out a 10,000 NFT collection. But what you'd see is you'd sell out, but then those community builders couldn't sustain any interest from their community 1 month out, 2 months out. And then that would create also a lot of bad vibes in the community, because people would feel like they paid all this money for nothing, because the vibes that they experienced when they purchased were no longer there. And then the incentives were misaligned with the community builder, because there likely wasn't going to be a repeat purchase unless there was a new NFT collection, which might take months to produce. And so then they would get kind of stuck. And then in terms of design itself, beyond just the goals of your community, is open communities. So when anyone can join a Discord server of a community, these types of communities are really susceptible to bad actors. There's no shortage of scammers on Discord and also spammers on Discord, people who are using your community just to get the word out there on their project and not really caring about what your project is about. And then the third element of community design that I took issue with is text-based communities. When you dive into a Discord server and there's a ton of people talking, then you can easily get lost, and it can feel overwhelming to try and catch up on information. And so what happens for community builders running those types of communities is that they are constantly summarizing, organizing, and reorganizing information within their Discord, and trying to point people in the right direction to be able to see that information. But it never really, it's a ton of administrative work, and it never really gets to the point that it's easy to digest the content within the community. And so for all those reasons, now we're going to talk about communities done in the right way. Is that community success requires intentionality from day one. Communities, as I've mentioned, are incredibly unique, and the best communities arise from thoughtful research and investment, and there are honestly very few shortcuts. So community, I just want to make it known, is not a set it and forget it channel. You need a dedicated community builder, ideally someone who identifies with that community And your community builder's job is to find all the little ways to create shared value and produce something together that none of you guys could on your own. So community has very high ROI, but it also takes a lot of work. You should think about community as a representation of your brand, your customer service department, and your referral engine all in one. So now we're going to talk about 3 different types of community. So there are communities of product. Members of these communities are focused primarily on discussing and learning about a specific product. So you can think about like Salesforce's Trailblazers or Twilio's Champions program. And then there are communities of practice. So these are all communities about members, all about leveling up a craft or discipline or skill and connecting with other practitioners in the space, potentially independent of a tool or platform. So for example, there's Web3 communities like Invisible College, which are trying to reinvent the college education system through community and NFTs. And then there is On Deck, which is a cohort-based learning community. And then there's communities like mine, Safary, which are a collection of growth leaders who are working together and talking about growth. And then we have communities of play. Members of this category come together around a common interest like sports, gaming, athletics, art, and many, many more. And so in terms of when you think about these types of communities, you'll probably think about games like NBA Top Shot or a lot of the NFT communities that exist in the space. So the way that you build a community is exactly the same process as building a product, is that you need to think about, who are the users that I want in my community, and what are their goals? And one of the challenges of having an open community versus a closed community is that you don't know necessarily, especially with so many people in Web3 being pseudonymous, what are the segments of community members and what are the goals that they have and what motivations do they have? All the things about the traditional product process of understanding your users and how they identify isn't possible when you have an open community and anyone can join and pop in and not share any information. And so another key element of that is, once you understand your users, you can create an ideal member profile and try and find more of those types of people. And once you understand what they care about and what gives them value, then you can give them a very clear value prop that makes them want to stay in your community time and time again. And then the final piece is that you want to create a vision for your community. So for Safary, for example, we've created a vision for our industry, and our community is an early representation of the industry of making growth collaborative. So your vision should be broad enough that you can twist and turn as a community, because as I mentioned, communities are unique, and as you add new members, the community dynamics change. But also to be aspirational and something that would uniquely appeal to the members of your community. So this is all to say that build a community like you would build a product. And so this is how we thought about the segments within Safary and also the motivations that they have as people. Is that the core of community is that your community needs to have utility. There needs to be a reason why people are joining your community, why they're staying in their community. And often utility can be, in a lot of NFT communities, it's like special perks to go to events or doing other things. In our community, it's really about knowledge is utility. And this is how we create clear utility for our members. So we actually when we started Safary, we thought that the core segments of our community were going to be Web3 growth leaders and Web3 founders. And so we started listing out the motivations that we thought the people had. And we also accepted other segments along the way, like venture capitalists and corporate innovators. Corporate innovators for us are people that are leading Web3 strategy at very large Web2 companies. And so these are some of the motivations that we thought that they might have. And ranked them by segment. So everyone was looking for a curated growth network. So right now, Safary is a group of 200 Web3 growth leaders, but we've actually kept it quite intimate compared to the scale that we could have had. We've had around 1,400 growth leaders have applied so far. And so, we're really curating a group of who we think are either the top Web3 growth leaders today or those that will be in the future. And so other people are really excited to join a community that has such curation in it. And then the second is, a lot of people are still, Web3 is still so new. And so most people aren't yet like established thought leaders. And so people are looking for platforms in which they could become a thought leader, or they're looking to join for social status, like to be part of this intimate group of the top growth leaders in Web3. Others are looking to learn tactics that would help them grow their Web3 company because they're ahead of growth at a Web3 company today. And others are just looking to study Web3 growth and learn more about it. And so this is sort of how we ranked up the segments that we thought would get the most value from our community. So the numbers correlate to how many groups they would be interested in, and their ranking. And so now I'm going to go through 10 lessons that we learned in terms of how we think about how we build Safari as a community differently, and how you can build your community differently as well. So the first learning that I think is really important is keep your community closed and intimate, under 500 people ideally. The reason why I say this is there are a lot of communities of Web3 that try to maximize the number of people and had 10,000, 50,000 people on Discord. But it's really hard for members within those communities to meet each other, and thus they didn't become very sticky. And so you'd have a 50,000 person Discord, but they'd have their community calls and there would only be like 10, 15 people on a call of 50,000. Versus in Safari, we have 200 members, but we have weekly calls every week and we have 30 to 40 people on our calls. So we have a very high percentage of our community joins our calls every week. And so we actually can get a lot more engaged people with less, and we don't have to deal with a lot of the admin headaches of what it means to run a 50,000 person community. So this is a learning that, communities are very much about your 100 true fans. Who are those 100 true fans? It's a lot easier to find your 100 true fans in a community of 200 to 500 than it is in a 50,000 person Discord server. So you can definitely find them, and you can actually probably create a better experience for your community members with less members in your community. And so this is what I was just talking about. Tip number 2 is define your segments and test your value prop. So if you don't know who is in your community, you're probably going to have a very difficult time figuring out a value proposition that will be compelling to them. So this is also where things got a little unique for us as a closed community. So when we have a batching strategy, which essentially means that we, most of the time we're a closed community, but we open our community every couple months to a select group of new members who all join at the exact same time. And so a batching strategy can be really great for promoting a better onboarding experience. So a lot of people, when they talk about Web3 Discord communities, talk about how the onboarding experience is broken. And what they mean by that is that there are all these people who join, they have a lot of time finding the information, a hard time finding the information that they need. And they also just come into this like chaotic environment. Others, might onboard into a community that is typically active at one time of day, but they might join when the server's kind of dead and see oh, this community is not for me. It's like not active, even though it is active at other times. And so a batching strategy enables you to bring in a group of people all at once with the same hype, the same expectations about what the community is about and doing. And that generates a lot more interest and stickiness in the community to see the value of its network. And so another key part of onboarding that we actually just started doing for our third batch is to have onboarding calls. And this might not sound super scalable, but if you have a smaller community, it's definitely manageable. If you have a 50,000 person community and you're looking for your 100 true fans, yeah, no way, you're not going to be able to talk to all of them. But with smaller communities, it's much more manageable, and even in slightly larger ones too. So there's a famous example of Jump, which is a marketing community for Web3 marketers. And Jeff, the community builder and founder there, he notes that he actually had 700 one-on-one onboarding calls with community members over the last year, and Jump is around 2,500 members. So we've probably in Safari, for our last batch where we first started offering this, we invited 80 people to join Safari, and 60 of them signed up to have onboarding calls with us. So yes, it was a very crazy week in which me and my co-founder talked to 60 different people from our community, but we gained a lot from it in terms of really understanding who was joining our community, what were their motivations, what were they hoping to get out of it, and also providing a human face to our community to give them more interest and opt-in and shared value. So number 5 is a matching strategy. So as I mentioned before, one of the main objectives of a community, or to make it a community, is the interconnectivity between its members. And so there's a question of, how do you ensure that members trust the value of a network? And so our hypothesis is that if a community member has an onboarding call with us, in which we can figure out what types of people they're trying to meet, and then match them with another member of our community, and that they have an enjoyable conversation with that person, then when other people from our community, the 3rd, 4th, 5th person, reach out to them, they'll be significantly more likely to trust the value of our network. And so this is how we begin to start this flywheel of members within Safari knowing each other personally, even if they live across the world from each other, which many of our members do. So our members, for backgrounds, Safari is global, and it's been global from day one. And our community is largely centered around the United States, Paris, India, and Singapore. 6, this is actually extremely, extremely important. Align on one core engagement action that you want people to take. This is the place where a lot of communities go wrong, is they say, like, I want people to talk to each other. I want people to go and do these things for us. I want people to write for us. I want people to talk on our podcast. I want people to do this. I want people to do that. And when you see all these different options for how you could be engaged in the community, it's like information overload, and you don't know which one to do, even if you would be potentially interested in all of them. And when you're overloaded by options, you tend to do actually none of them at all. And so we really had to think deeply about, our community is heads of growth and directors of growth and VPs of growth at Web3 companies, or founders. These are people who are extremely busy. And so how can we provide them value in the least amount of time with the simplest action? And so we aligned on, our community. The way that you get value is we are not a text-based community. We are an audio-based community. So you don't have to spend time scrolling through our Discord, learning and reading what people have talked about to get value. The way you get value is you show up at this time every week. Every Tuesday, we have a call at the exact same time for 1 hour. And that's how you get value in our community. And our members tell us that it's the highest leverage hour that they spend each week. So that shows, 1, we're doing something right and they get value from it. And 2, it's easy, it's repeatable, it's the same time, they know the deal. A repeatable way to get value becomes a ritual, and a ritual is a great way to retain people within your community. So we've been having these weekly calls every week for the last 6 months on a range of different topics that appeal to advanced growth leaders. So we'll talk about emerging channels, we'll talk about advanced growth data, we'll talk about what attribution looks like in Web3, we'll talk about Web3 growth funnel, Web3 growth loops, case studies across projects, all sorts of things that really appeal to advanced growth leaders who are at the forefront of their space. And the seventh is design ways for members to create shared value. So when we started doing these weekly calls, it was a lot of us producing content on advanced growth topics. But as we more matured as a community, we actually found that it was more interesting and we were able to leverage our members to create shared value for each other. And so what I mean by this is that community members often now are the ones that speak on the weekly calls and educate each other. So for example, we'll bring on Web3 growth leaders from different verticals, like and Web3 growth leaders within Safary, and these are all Safary members. We don't bring in any speakers from outside our community, which also adds to the power of the network, is that these Web3 growth leaders will talk about like how to grow NFT projects, and they'll talk about those topics because they've done it before, or they'll talk about how to grow L1 and L2s, how they do ecosystem growth in Web3. Or they'll talk about other subjects. And so we have this rotating cast of different Safary members that speak on our weekly call to educate the rest of the community. And so that's like a really great way that members can create shared value for each other, and also takes the burden off of the community builder. Number 8, set a bold vision for your product. I mean, beyond your product. If you have a product for your community, that's great, but your vision has to encapsulate a lot more than your product. So for example, our vision is to make Web3 growth collaborative, and our product is around data analytics. But this actually, there's only so much you can talk about in terms of data analytics. And so it's actually very helpful to have a bold, grander vision because it also gives your community a lot more to talk about. I think this is also a challenge that a lot of communities have is, the world of, if you were like B2B, like growth marketing brand community, you might get a little limited. But if your community is just to talk about growth, well, there are a lot of different ways to define growth, and there's a lot of different subjects that might be interesting to your community to talk about. So having a bold, grand vision also creates a universe of things that you and your community can talk about. Number 9, don't forget to differentiate. As I mentioned before, a big reason why people build communities in the first place is to build something that's unique and different from what other people think about and talk about. And so community is so don't necessarily do your community like everyone else. Also look for people who aren't necessarily in other communities. I think this is another thing that we saw quickly with a lot of Web3 communities in the beginning, is that you'd have the same cast of characters across lots of different communities. And so you should both be trying to find new people as well to be part of your Web3 community that potentially aren't involved in other Web3 communities today. And often those people, if they're not super involved in other communities, will become your champions and the people who really help you grow your community over time. And then the last point is that communities are highly experimental, and you have to embrace it. So for us, one of the other key benefits of our batching strategy is that every batch we can experiment and try something new. And our communities looked very different every single batch that we've had. Our first batch, it was a group of top Web3 growth leaders just talking very casually about different topics. Our second batch was very much a cohort-based learning course where I taught a group of people about what it means to do Web3 growth. And then our third batch has been primarily people within the community teaching each other about what does Web3 growth look like. And I don't know what our fourth batch is going to look like yet, but that's all part of the fun of creating communities. Is every new person changes the dynamics, every new time changes the dynamics, and it's an exciting ongoing experiment between you and a group of people. And so that's it from me. Here are some of the ways that you can find me, and I'll turn it over to Q&A.
Awesome, Justin. Really enjoyed the session. I'm a marketer, growth marketer myself, so really liked how to the point you were and practical you were. So those insights are actually something that people can go away and use it as a checklist and start applying, right? So really loved how practical it was. Now I have a couple of questions that people have put, right? So I'll just share my screen so that you can pick and choose.
Okay, I think I have to stop sharing mine. 1 sec.
Yeah. Also, folks, I have opened the chat. Firstly, we'll take questions from the Slido. After that, if we have any more time, then we can take questions from the chat as well. Yes, just a second. Yeah. So there are 12 questions. First question, Akshit says, can you share some Web3 focused growth and marketing tools like Revoto for newsletter, etc.? You are on mute.
Sorry, I muted myself. There are definitely a few Web3 growth and marketing tools. One of them that's really interesting is called Smoothie. It's like a product hunt for Web3. I'll put some of these links in the chat for you. Here's my Twitter first if you want to learn more about me. And here's Smoothie, which is coming next. Smoothie is like as I mentioned, product hunt for Web3. So you can get posted you can get your project put onto Smoothie, and then people go through the process and vote. People are actually doing it they just launched last week. And actually Safari is up this week on Smoothie. So it's just a cool product hunt like feature to get discovered. Another one is called Pre-Mint, which is basically geared for NFT projects. It's a way to verify that people did certain actions before you put them on your whitelist or your mint list. And so those are some of the ones that people use today. But I'd say the growth stack, as people consider it, is still a mix of mostly Web2 tools that people are using to do Web3 tactics. So like, Discord is a Web2 tool, but that people primarily use for Web3. So we'll definitely see more Web3 native tools in the future for growth, but we're very much in the early innings. And to give you a sense of, Web3 growth as being in the early innings, there were very, very few people talking about Web3 growth before Safari was created, and it was created in February. So we're very, very early on into what this industry is going to look like. And it's certainly going to evolve, and you'll see a lot more growth products in the next couple of years.
For sure. Just to add to that, folks, follow Justin on Twitter, and his profile is a goldmine. I have seen you have a Notion repository that you maintain with all the reading material and resources, right? And I've checked it. It's amazing. So just folks, you can check that out as well. Next question is pretty interesting. How do you get people to join your community? For example, like the first 100 people, how do you get that? For example, how did you get to apply people to join Safari, as Google and Facebook ads are hard for crypto? Are there any other channels used to acquire users?
Definitely. So actually, this may surprise people, but we've paid $0 to acquire the 1,400 people who have applied to join Safari. We've never used paid ads. So how do we do this? We did this by first, so I'm a Web3 growth leader, and I think it helps a lot to have the person who, if you're building a community, hopefully you're building a community for you. And if you're not building a community for you, aka like you don't identify with that community, you should find somebody to run your community who does naturally identify with your community. So it was a great point that I naturally identified with the community that I wanted to create. And so I just started messaging different people on LinkedIn, asking them if they would be open to talk to me about Web3 growth. I said, hey, I'm a Web2 growth leader. I recently got into Web3. Would you be willing to talk to me and just kind of share what Web3 growth is all about? And through the strategy, I talked to 10 people. And then I told each of them, like, I'm thinking about starting a Web3 growth community. What do you think about this? And really got their insights on what they would like to see in the community. Everyone was really excited about it because Safari is the first Web3 growth community. There wasn't one before. And so got some of their insights. And then I wrote up a vision page and put it onto a very, very basic unbounced website, which looks a lot like it does today. Like I haven't changed or updated that vision page in like 5 months. I haven't updated the website really. So it's like clear, concise. And then what I did is I made a drop. So I said, I posted on LinkedIn, we're building this Web3 growth community. the applications close in 5 days. This is the first time I'd ever talked about it publicly, and I didn't have like a super large LinkedIn following or anything. I just had probably around 3,000 LinkedIn connections. And so I posted and said, we're starting this community. You might be interested to join it for XYZ reasons. I can go and find the post for you guys later if it's helpful. And apply if you're interested. We're only taking 40 people. And honestly, the reason why I went with 40 was because I thought there's no way that more than 50 people apply to this community. Like there's, we're unknown. It doesn't exist yet. Like, we'll see what happens. And I went back to, before I posted this, I went back to these 10 people that I talked to and I said, hey, will you guys share this post when I posted? And so 5 of them did. And one of those people that did was the head of growth at Ledger, who I talked to. And he also had probably around the same size audience that I did, but in Paris. And that's kind of how things went from there. And so we were very surprised and fortunate to have gotten 200 applications for our first batch just in those 5 days. So I think that it's a combination of all things that any of you could do is, reach out to talk to a reasonable number of people that you think would be interested in your community. Tell them that you're building the community. Say that you want them to share it in real time when you talk to them. Probably only half of them will. That's fine. But that was enough to get our first 200 people to be interested in Safari, and things just went from there. And my big bet for being a closed community is that closed community also drives word of mouth. Is that if people can't directly access your community and people say that it's a great community, then they'll probably think that it's like even better than it actually is. And that drives a lot of like FOMO and hype to join an exclusive community. Versus if your community is open, then people just join and they're like, oh, I didn't really think that this was what I thought it was. And then they leave and then you never have them again. So I think that, the lessons of Safari can be applied to any community out there is talk to 10 people, get 5 of them to share it. Maybe you get 30, maybe you get 20, maybe you get 15, but 15 people is enough to start a community and start getting to people talking about something. So, yeah.
That's some really great points. And one of the points that I really liked and I would like to emphasize is creating exclusivity, right? If you add friction and make it exclusive, and then if people get to join, they will actually value that community as well. There will be lesser chance of them becoming inactive. So that's a great point, Justin. Next is, how do you build and keep the community engaged using the product without token launch? Akshit is asking this.
Yeah, so for us, we haven't launched our product yet. So our community is still community. But I think that actually, financial incentives can skew the value of the community. And so this is something that I've thought about from day one with Safari, is that even when we have our product, we'll monetize via the product, but the community will always be free. And the reason why I think about that is free to join, that is. So if you're accepted, you won't pay, and people don't pay for today. And the reason why I think about that is, when you pay for something, your expectations of what what you get change. And I think that people genuinely want to engage and help people within communities, but when financial incentives are involved, that genuine help and genuine want can change things. So let me give you an example, is that, within Safari, people today currently give up their time as speakers to talk to the community. If we said, people who, speak will get paid, then we would, one, have to pay all speakers, because that wouldn't be fair to say, trying to incentivize some people with money and others willing to do it for free. So that cuts into, unit economics and how much value is created. And 2 is like, if I was like, hey, you have to pay $1,000 to join Safari, and then they join and they think, well, is this really worth $1,000 to me? Am I getting exactly what I wanted out of it? They said that they would, I'd be able to access all these growth leaders, but they, all of a sudden aren't responding to me, or the ones that I wanted aren't responding to me. Then that kind of like degrades the vibes of the community, versus if it's a space where people, you pay by creating shared utility, you pay by engaging, you pay by experiencing each other and learning together. And so I think that those natural non-financial effects of the community are actually a lot stronger than if we added financial dynamics into the community.
Next question is, what kind of content works best on Discord community? I mean, I guess the person is trying to ask, you can expand that, what kind of content you can give to give value to the community members, or what kind of things you can do to give value to the community members?
Definitely. Yeah, so for us, we think about, in terms of on the content side, we think about, what really appeals to Web3 growth leaders. What are the topics that they would be most interested in? And as I mentioned, we primarily produce this content as community calls. So no one outside of Safari can join our community calls, just for the community. And for growth leaders, we know that they don't want to hear like the one-on-one. They want to hear, as like with this session, a mix of like, they understand the trends, or they want to hear what the trends are, but then they also want to know like, okay, but like, how did you actually deploy this strategy, and is it replicable? There are a lot of things in growth that you'll find that are, people did this thing and it worked magically for them, but it's actually not replicable. Like they kind of just got lucky and it was like the right time and they did the right thing, but they don't like understand how. And so that's like not totally real growth in my mind. It's like growth leaders really want to learn from other growth leaders that did something that they could potentially replicate in their own business. And so in my opinion, that's what makes great content for our community specifically. So it really is about, how do you find content that's going to appeal to your community? And content that appeals to your community starts with knowing who are the people in your community. You won't be able to design great content if you don't know what types of segments of people are in your community today. So that's why I think that closed is better than open, because it helps you understand your community in a way that you wouldn't be able to if they're just a bunch of pseudonymous names in your Discord server.
Next question is, how to create an automation mechanism in an ever-growing community for better engagement and organic growth?
Yeah, so I think that this is like also comes down to community design, is that a lot of communities, like there are certain types of automations that are really useful. And I think that those are around how communities are structured. So there are different community management tools that you can use to, like, for example, get all of your DMs into one inbox so that other team members can answer them, or to see what your community analytics are in Discord. But personally, like, you can also run a successful community without any tools. And that's sort of where I get to with community design, is that, to be honest, we use 0 tools to run Safari today, only Discord, which is very unique from other communities. And the reason why we're able to do that is because by being closed, we don't have to deal with, we've never had a problem with scammers. We've never had a problem with spammers. And the reason why, I believe, is because with the closed community, people actually have something to lose. They fought so hard to get into the community that why would they risk their spot by, spamming a bunch of, personal stuff about their project when we create this very collaborative ethos in our community. So that's sort of some of the things that I tend to think about for that.
Next question. What is the scope for Web2 GTM tactics in the Web3 world?
Yeah, I think that this is a really interesting question. And I think it really depends on what type of business you're running. So the first business that we tried to build before we built Safari was a business to business, a collaboration tool for DAOs. So we're basically trying to sell to other businesses. And we tried to deploy like all the Web2 tactics of like what B2B outbound looks like. And all of them were a massive failure for us. So I think that, like, in terms of B2B, you can't use those like same tools, because you have 2 really inherent challenges. One, most users in Web3 are pseudonymous. So you don't know their real identity. You can't just like create a lead list like you do from LinkedIn and then like start emailing people. So like that's one big thing. And the second big thing is like, who do you contact and how? You don't really know those things either. So There's not great Web3 native communication channels that exist yet. They're starting wall-to-wall messaging and other things, but we're still very much in the early days. So in terms of the Web2 tactics that work, I'd say it's the fundamentals. So you should think about like Web3 growth as a highly experimental space where people are trying new tactics and strategies all the time. And this is why things are evolving very, very quickly in Web3. But you can use Web2 fundamentals. So everything that you believe is like a fundamental of Web2, of thinking about your users and product building and all those things, the fundamentals are exactly the same. Nothing changes with the fundamentals, but what's changed is the tactics and strategies, which I believe are quite unique in Web3. So use the fundamentals that you understand to build new tactics and strategies in Web3.
Got it. Justin, we'll take 2 questions because we are already at 9. In case you have time, then we can take more. But these 2 questions will take. The first one is, what do you look for in an applicant to accept him into the community?
Definitely. Yeah. So for us, what we look for is we're trying to find growth leaders. We look for 2 different types of personas primarily today. One, we look for Web3 growth leaders, so heads of growth at communities and projects across the Web3 ecosystem. So we really aim to have diversity across DeFi projects, NFT projects, infrastructure, L1, L2s, games, etc. Where like really want like an even spread so that people can really learn from each other across verticals. But the second is we look for Web2 growth leaders. And the reason why we look to Web2 growth leaders is we believe we have a very important educational opportunity to onboard the next generation of Web2 growth leaders into Web3. And the way that we do this is, there are a lot of communities out there that are trying to teach everyday people and professionals too about the value of Web3 and the fundamentals of blockchain, et cetera. But we believe that actually the best way to get Web2 growth leaders into Web3 is to teach them about all the cool, exciting things about how Web3 growth is much more fun to do than Web2 growth. And so that's our secondary fundamental, is that we look for interesting Web2 growth leaders who probably might not know that much about Web3 and might have never worked for a Web3 project before, and try and get them interested and excited about Web3 growth. So primarily looking for Web3 growth leaders across verticals and Web2 growth leaders who are interested in learning about Web3 growth.
Got it. Next is it advisable to create your own community for your own product or join other communities, or both?
Definitely. I think that you naturally get a lot of control from building your own community for your product. But I think that there is an inherent challenge that you'll find depending on the stage of your product of, how do you think in many ways, community and your product will come in constant conflict in terms of what do you prioritize more. For example, if you are constantly pushing your product to the community, then that's going to decrease the vibes in your community. Like the community member experience will go down as a result of you like constantly trying to like get people to use your product in your community. And that also makes your community seem much more like an audience. Like it's like you versus them, rather than like you facilitating an experience for them to create shared value. And if you prioritize your community, then people know less about your product, but they know more about your brand and your community. So it's this like inherent push and pull that a lot of Web3 companies struggle with, is how do I, maintain the best vibes in my community while also ensuring that people know about and use my product. And so I think that there's going to be a constant push and pull between these 2 things. And in terms of joining other communities, you should certainly explore other communities. But as I mentioned with like spammers, like people might like, go to your website and see your community, your product, but it's very hard to get other community builders to push your products in their communities for you. So I'd say like you get a lot more control by creating your own product, creating your own community, but you also have to think about, creating the right vibes within your community too.
Awesome. Thank you for answering all those questions, Justin. Now, someone had also asked that can they get an invite to join the community? Not sure if they'll get an edge, but if possible, can you share the application link to these folks as well? If they're interested, they can apply to join Safary.
Yeah, here's our website, and on our website you can apply for batch 4. And here's our Twitter too, if you're curious. We also post a lot of things on Twitter about how to build Web3 communities and other fun things.
Awesome. So yeah, that was all for today. Thank you for giving so much value, Justin. It was really fun hearing all of those. In fact, like I was also taking a lot of notes while listening to you. So thank you for doing this.
Awesome. Thanks everyone for having me, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
A lot of people are giving great response and thanking you for the session. So you can have a look.
Yeah, it's great to see.
Awesome. See you on this other side, Justin. Looking forward to have a chat again.
Yeah, sounds good. Have a good one, everyone. Take care. Bye.
All right, folks. So it was a really genuinely very practical and nice session. I hope you got a ton of value. I learned a lot myself. Being a marketer, the perspective that he showed was really valuable. Yeah, feedback link I'll just quickly share. Give me a second. Now, few of the questions were a little repetitive. That's why I couldn't take it. And also there was a time constant that he had to leave by 9, right? So that was the reason I skipped few questions and took the most unique one. Now, one thing that I'll really suggest, if you really like the session and want to dive deeper, you should definitely check out his Twitter profile, and he has a repository, Notion doc, which of all his readings, all his study material. You can check it out. So that will help you. Let me just quickly share. So yeah, I've shared the feedback link. You can put, let me just check. Give me a second. I'll find it and share. It's pretty simple. He had shared his Twitter profile. So, but still, let me just do that for you. Try to do that for you. Yeah, so someone has digital Sarath has already shared. That's really nice. All the people who will watch the recording later, you can just go to his Twitter profile and find the link. All right, folks, we'll see you next week with the next session where we will start with our week 5 and dive deeper into DApps, right?